Welcome to Bankole's Nation. I'm your host, Bankole Thompson. Coming up on this week's edition of our podcast, we're looking at the 2025 Detroit mayoral debate between Pastor Solomon Kinloch, the senior pastor of Triumph Church, and Mary Sheffield, the president of the Detroit City Council. Both candidates are set to debate on Wednesday, October 15th, inside the studios of Channel 7 WXYZ here in Detroit. The question, though, is whether Pastor Solomon Kinloch can close the deal during that debate as he presents himself as the anti-establishment candidate. The analysis and commentary coming up right after this break. Stay with us. Welcome to Bankole's Nation. I'm your host, Bankole Thompson, and thank you so much for tuning in to our regular podcast here, where we deal with all the issues that are in the public domain, issues that are of legitimate public interest. And of course, if you have been following the 2025 Detroit mayor's race, you'll realize that this is perhaps one of the few, if not the only platform that gives the unvarnished perspective on the candidates. Of course, the analysis and the commentary that others would rather not have you hear or perhaps even follow. The 2025 Detroit mayor's race, the general election, is in full gear between Reverend Solomon Kinloch, the senior pastor of Triumph Church, and Mary Sheffield, the president of the Detroit City Council. And of course, either candidate, either Reverend Kenlak or Council President Sheffield, will become the mayor of Detroit come January 2026. What that all means is that whoever succeeds Mike Duggan gets to captain the ship, here the ship of state, as we call it, for 2026 and beyond. And of course, before we get to that, though, there is a mayoral debate coming up on Wednesday, October 15th, inside the studios of WXYZ Channel 7, the local affiliate, ABC local affiliate here in Detroit. There's a mayoral debate, October 15th on Wednesday, between Reverend Kenlak and Mary Sheffield. It's perhaps one of the few, if not the only mayoral debate that is available for these two to stand next to each other and debate the issues. The other forum that looks like a debate, but really not a debate, I think, is the end of this month, and it's going to be at the Detroit Economic Club, and it's almost like a town hall type where, they get to interview one candidate, then after that they'll interview another candidate. That's really not a debate. It's a conversation style forum, if you will. But this debate is between Reverend Kenlak and Mary Sheffield, and it's going to take place October 15th on Wednesday inside the studios of WXYZ TV, the ABC affiliate. And of course, the moderators are Carolyn Clifford, WXYZ anchor, and of course, Chuck Stokes, the editorial director at Channel 7. So here's the deal. You have to ask yourself the question, perhaps the only time that Reverend Kenlak and Mary Sheffield will stand next to each other. What does that mean? Well, there's an opportunity here for Reverend Kenlak to establish himself and make it clear that he's the anti-establishment candidate. There's an opportunity for him to talk to his doubters, talk to those who are skeptical about his campaign, and those who don't know him. Because I think one of the issues that we've seen that have come up in this 2025 mayor's race is, who is Solomon Kinloch? Well, we know that he built a church called Triumph Church. He made it into one of the largest black churches in the nation, 7 campuses. It's the largest church of its kind in the state of Michigan. The man has built an institution. You got to give it to him. You can't take that away from him. And I think that's also part of the opposition against Reverend Kenlak, is his ability and his ability in building Triumph Church into a mega black religious institution. That's been part of the opposition. And I know with that also, I know our folk, some folk get jealous about that. And that jealousy doesn't only come out of from the political space, but it also comes from the ranks of the clergy as well. And there are folks who are saying, what audacity does he have to run for mayor of Detroit? Well, anybody can run for mayor of Detroit. Nothing stopped Mike Duggan from running for mayor of Detroit. So why can Solomon Kinloch run for mayor of Detroit? And Solomon Kinloch has positioned himself as the anti-establishment candidate. he needs to make that clear on the debate stage on Wednesday with Mary Sheffield. He needs to explain why he's the anti-establishment candidate and talk about his vision for the city, what that vision looks like, given that Detroit is now the highest poverty city in the nation for cities that have a population of 500,000 or more people, almost 500,000 or more people. Detroit's poverty rate is at 34%, according to the latest census report. But added to that conundrum is the fact that Detroit's child poverty rate is at 51%. Over half of the city's kids live in abject poverty. Those are issues that Solomon Kinloch, Pastor Kenlak, can bring up in the debate to establish himself as the anti-establishment candidate and talk about what he would do. He talks about the Kenlak promise and what that means. He needs to be able to explain that before that debate audience. And I would like to see how Mary Sheffield, the president of the Detroit City Council, who is considered the front runner here, how she responds to that in the sense that she's endorsed by Mayor Mike Duggan, the incumbent outgoing mayor, who's living the city in economic doldrums. Mayor Duggan is living Detroit. His economic record, what is the record? 51% child poverty rate, 34% overall poverty in the city. Detroit leads the nation for cities with a population of more than 500,000 people. Child poverty rate, 51%. Over half of the city's kids are in abject poverty. That is the economic record which Mayor Mike Duggan is living behind to go run for governor as an independent. And he endorsed Mary Sheffield. So Sheffield should be able to explain how comes this is happening. How comes this happened? And I can tell you this, knowing politicians the way I do and the fact that I've written about them for years and I've had a front row seat to these issues in the city, I'll tell you this, if the poverty numbers had dropped dramatically, if they had dropped drastically, if the 2024 census report numbers had dropped, Mayor Mike Duggan would take credit for that. If the child poverty rate was not 51%, if it was, let's say, if it went down to 25%, Mayor Mike Duggan will have a gala, a political gala, a celebration. And you'll know who will be the special guest at the celebration? Council President Mary Sheffield. Because I know how Duggan operates. I know how these politicians operate. They take credit for what is good and they run away from what is bad. And are not willing to explain why it's bad. My columns in the Detroit News, I wrote a column 2 weeks ago. And what did I say? I asked Mike Duggan, Mayor Duggan, to explain this poverty crisis and to step up and offer a remedy. But he has not done so. Now, he's held a press conference taking credit for the reduction in violent crime. I saw that. Right? I'm not mad at that. He took credit for violent crime reduction. But he's not held a press conference to talk about what he's going to do about poverty in the city of Detroit. There are people who are drowning economically. There are people who are drowning in the pool of economic misery. That is a fact. It's not a fiction. So I would like to see Pastor Kenlak ask candidate Sheffield about these poverty numbers. Because when Mayor Mike Duggan endorsed Mary Sheffield, he projected the endorsement on the backdrop of the projection was that he and Mary Sheffield had a working partnership over the years where they've worked together from the council and the mayor's office. So what did that partnership produce? Right? The question had to be asked. It's a Socratic question. What did that partnership produce? 51% child poverty rate, 34% overall poverty in the city of Detroit, leading the nation for cities with a population of 500,000 or more. Is that what the partnership produced? Or did it produce more skyscrapers downtown, the towers of Babel? What did the partnership produce? There's abject poverty. There's economic misery. The mayor is leaving the city in economic doldrums to go run as an independent, go run for governor as an independent. He's not going to take credit for 51% child poverty rate because those are numbers that he can dispute. What is he going to say? The Census Bureau got their numbers wrong? The 34% overall poverty numbers are wrong? These are issues that Pastor Solomon Kinloch can bring up in the debate. He can talk about these issues. This is perhaps one of the only opportunities he has standing next to his opponent, Council President Mary Sheffield, and talk about his vision. And that is what is his economic inclusive vision. What is his vision to address economic injustice? You know, what is his vision to address this idea of the eviction machine that you have in Detroit? Somebody knows about that. What's his vision to address the question of affordable housing, which is really not affordable in Detroit? What is his vision to address the question of gentrification? So Pastor Kenlak has an opportunity. The question is, can he close the deal? And the debate will show whether he can close the deal. Because the opponent he's running against, Mary Sheffield, has a record. Right? And I believe that with the mayor's endorsement, he extends his record to her. They have a working partnership. So she should be able to answer. I mean, it's not a question where she gets to cherry pick what is good and talk about the great things that they've done together in terms of her partnership with the mayor, working as council president and the mayor of the city. But she should be able to also talk about the failures, working together, and how that has produced failure. Somebody ought to answer for the 51% child poverty rate. Somebody ought to answer for the 34% overall poverty that places Detroit ahead of every other city in the nation that has a population of 500,000 or more. Those are not fluttering numbers. Those are not numbers that to be proud of. Those are numbers that tells me that everybody who calls themselves a leader in Detroit should bow their heads in shame. Those numbers are a moral indictment of the collective leadership of Detroit. That's what those numbers tell me. And that's what they are. And you know what? Let's even keep it real. Remember those two kids, the Corey kids who were found dead in their mother's vehicle in a parking lot in downtown Casino, right? In a casino parking lot. Two young little kids, black kids. They did not have to die. They did not have to die. They could have been alive today if they had the resources. I believe that. Their mother called the city, got no call back, right? I attended that funeral. The funeral was a Triumph Church. I went to the funeral. I stayed to the end. Pastor Kenlak gave a great eulogy for those kids. I looked at those two caskets, one pink and one blue. The little boy was in the blue casket. The little girl was in the pink casket. Little, unoffending. In the words of Martin Luther King Jr., those two little kids are unoffending little kids. Remember when Dr. King eulogized those three kids at the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing of those three little kids? Dr. King called them unoffending, right? I looked at those little kids, in the words of Martin Luther King Jr. in Detroit, those two Corey kids, unoffending little kids who died because they did not have the opportunity. In a city that is bragging about skyscrapers, in a city that is bragging about creating more Taj Mahals, right? We got kids who are dying in parking lots. And that's not enough to shock the conscience of the city's leadership. I went to that funeral. Mayor Mike Duggan was not at that funeral. You know, I'll let his conscience deal with that. I think I did a podcast to send him a message, but I'll let his conscience deal with that. He was not at that funeral. You ask yourself, if those were two little white kids, would he have been at the funeral? Oh, Bankole, what are you talking about? You know exactly what I'm talking about. I asked a Socratic question. If those two little kids who died because they had no resources, their mother could not find a resource, they were homeless in a parking lot of a downtown casino, if they were white kids, would Mayor Mike Duggan had attended the funeral that I attended for those kids? Ask yourself that question. That issue ought to come up at the debate on Wednesday. Pastor Solomon Kinloch should bring up that issue at the debate and talk about what it means as a minister eulogizing two little kids, unoffending, in the words of Martin Luther King Jr., unoffending little kids, eulogizing them, who did not, in my opinion, have to die. They died prematurely. So beneath, the skyscrapers and all the other stuff, this is the reality of Detroit that some folk don't want to talk about. The people that are drowning in economic misery, the people that are drowning who are being economically subjugated, the victims of income inequality. That ought to be front and center of the debate. And who better to make that case than the anti-establishment candidate, Solomon Kinloch, the senior pastor of Triumph Church? Who better to execute the case, to litigate, to make the case as to why this cannot be business as usual? And there's an element to race about this. I know folk are going to comment on this podcast and, oh, there goes Bankole. Look, I'm very conscious about race. I'm a black man. Race matters. Don't get it twisted. Don't get it twisted. It matters. There's an element about race here because I'm wondering, I wrote 2 or 3 columns, I think, on those kids. In fact, I took it upon I went and wrote a series of columns on homelessness after that happened. But I'm wondering here if those 2 little kids, those 2 little black kids, the Corey kids who died in their mother's vehicle because they could not find a place in their own city, a place to lay their head at night. They had no resources. I wonder if those kids were white kids, if they were little white kids, what would have happened? I'll tell you what would have happened. This is my opinion. Now, you can dispute it. You have a right to your opinion. You have a right to dispute what I have to say, but I have a right to my opinion. If those were 2 little white kids, you know what? I believe that Governor Gretchen Whitmer would have been at a funeral. Mayor Mike Duggan would have been at a funeral. And somebody in Lansing would have been talking about changing some sort of state law to make sure that there's a more coordinated system when it relates to addressing homelessness in the state of Michigan. I believe that. That's my opinion. You don't have to accept it, but I'm just expressing my opinion on my platform. If those little black kids, Corey kids, were white kids, I believe my opinion is that Governor Gretchen Whitmer would have attended the funeral. Mayor Mike Duggan would have been at the funeral. That's my opinion. When I went to the funeral, I did not see Mike Duggan. I shook my head. I wasn't surprised. I know Mike Duggan very well. I wasn't surprised. But the larger point is that it's unfortunate we are at this juncture, right? That I have to use the death of 2 unoffending little kids, right? To underscore the significance of the economic misery, right? Economic doldrums that Detroit is in, that no one wants to talk about. People are excited to post and talk about the Taj Mahal. You can have a Taj Mahal all you want. You can build skyscrapers all you want. You can build a Tower of Babel all you want. But all around the Tower of Babel, what do we have? Economic desolation. That does not make sense. Something gotta give, and somebody ought to be able to speak to those issues, and somebody ought to be able to shock the conscience of our elected officials to deal with those issues. And those who are running for mayor have an inescapable political and moral obligation to address these issues that I'm talking about. Mary Sheffield, the president of the Detroit City Council, has been in that seat, has been a council member for a long time. She ought to talk about her anti-poverty agenda. What does that look like? And she ought to be able to explain the 51% child poverty rate that Detroit has. She ought to be able to explain the 34% overall poverty rate in Detroit, which now leads the nation for cities that have a population of 500,000 or more. Mary Sheffield, the president of the Detroit City Council, ought to be able to say that, explain how that took place. Her critics are calling her nothing but a rubber stamp leadership. Mayor Mike Duggan endorsed her proudly, talked about their partnership. They've worked together, all kinds of stuff. Well, did you work together to produce 51% child poverty rate? Did you work together to produce 34% overall poverty rate? Pastor Solomon Kinloch, the opponent here, the anti-establishment candidate, ought to be able to speak to that issue at the debate on Wednesday, October 15th. He should lay out the case. He should make the case. And he should talk about Mayor Mike Duggan and what Duggan has not done. Because in endorsing Mary Sheffield, Mayor Duggan said, Kenlak ain't the one. Kenlak ain't it. So Pastor Kenlak ought to be able to say, Mike Duggan ain't never been it. He's living the city with 51% poverty rate, 34%, 51% child poverty rate, 34% overall poverty rate in the city of Detroit. That places Detroit as the leader in poverty in the nation. That is a shame. Let me repeat myself. That is a damn shame. And that is, like I said earlier on this podcast, that is a moral indictment. The next mayor of Detroit ought to have a clear-cut anti-poverty agenda. The next mayor of Detroit, whether they like it or not, ought to be able to speak to these issues of economic and income inequality. They can't run away from it because it's here. Or they're telling us, if they don't do anything about it, that means that they're telling us it's okay for kids to die inside their mother's vehicle because they could not find a place to stay at night. That means that they're saying that it's okay. Let's think about it. That means that they're saying that it's okay. So we have to address this issue. And this debate affords Kenlak an opportunity to talk about this issue because this is the only time he'll get to debate his opponent. Now, why am I emphasizing so much on Kenlak? Because he's been the one under attack. We've seen all kinds of scrutiny he's gone through. I mean, I'm waiting for the big story about, what kind of breakfast he has in the morning. Does he eat omelet or not? That's going to be the next shoe to drop. How does he like his omelet in the morning? Because, I mean, they've put the brother through all kinds of scrutiny, all kinds of the rigors of scrutiny, and much of it has to do with race, period. Derek Bell. I have Derek Bell's book here. In fact, I cited Derek Bell. Let me pull it up. I cited Derek Bell, who was a professor at Harvard University. Actually, Obama, when he was a student at Harvard Law School, had an encounter with Derek Bell, one of the originators of critical race theory. But Derek Bell, a remarkable giant and legal scholar on race and the American legal system. This book is titled "And We Are Not Saved." And it's the kicker to the book is The Elusive Quest for Racial Justice. And we are not saved. The elusive quest for racial justice. Why am I bringing up Derek Bell in this conversation? Because much of this has to do with race when we look at how Pastor Kenlak has been scrutinized. Right? And I've talked about it before, and I'm going to say it again. If Pastor Kenlak was a white male evangelist, if he was a white male mega pastor with the integrity that he has, that has built a church like Triumph out of the ashes into a 7-church campus, made it one of the largest churches in the nation, the largest in Michigan. If he was a white man, they would be calling him the Billy Graham of Detroit. They would be calling him the Benny Hinn of Detroit. They would be calling him the Jimmy Swaggart of Detroit. They will be calling him all kinds of names in adulation and deference for his contributions in building a spiritual edifice like Triumph. They would be. I know that because I've seen white folk who are not nearly as accomplished as Pastor Kenlak, giving a lot of deference. I've been in rooms where white folk who are not nearly as accomplished as other black folk are given deference. I know how the game is played, right? I know how it's played. And that's why someone like me, from where I'm sitting, from the space that I occupy, I've decided not to keep quiet about this. I've decided that I must go on the record to speak about this and to explain what is at play here. Mayor Mike Duggan did not go to the scrutiny that Pastor Kenlak went through when Mike Duggan was running for mayor in 2013. Mike Duggan left the DMC. DMC paid a fine of $30 million. He was a Wayne County prosecutor. You know, we talk about the Mullis Green case. I can go on and on. None of those issues came up in the media. They know how to go find stories about Mullis Green. They know how to go find stories about the DMC and the $30 million fine with the Justice Department. They know how to go find stories about the McNamara machine, the good old McNamara machine, which Mike Duggan was at the head of that machine as the top deputy of the late Edward M. McNamara. But guess what happened? Mike Duggan never went through the scrutiny that Pastor Kenlak has gone through, because Mike Duggan is a powerful white male. He's an influential white male. Mike Duggan is an untouchable white man. That's what happens. Most of them are untouchable. They will touch a black man, but they won't touch a white man. Somebody knows what I'm talking about. Look around what's happening around the nation. You know exactly what I'm talking about. So Mayor Mike Duggan never went through that scrutiny in the media that Pastor Kenlak is going through. You know, the folk who are spitting on Kenlak, who are trying to delegitimize him, the folk who are jealous of him. How dare he? What makes he think he can run for mayor? The folk who are doing all of that, the delegitimization campaign, did not do that to Mayor Mike Duggan. I was there. Mike Duggan did not face that scrutiny. You know, I served on 2 of the 3 debates that were held in 2013. The one organized by CBS and the one organized by WXYZ. Sat a front row seat. And of course, back then I talked to Mike Duggan. We had on the record and off the record meeting. He'll tell you that. I'm not going to say where we had those meetings at. But Duggan and I know each other. He knows Bankole Thompson. He knows I take no prisoners. Mike Duggan knows Bankole Thompson takes no prisoners. I can tell you that. He will tell you that. He knows that. I had on the record and off the record meeting with Mike Duggan before he ran for mayor. He never went through any level of scrutiny that Pastor Kenlak is going through. Even after repeatedly running for re-election so many times, including the Make Your Date scandal, which I wrote about. I referenced it in my column this week in the Detroit News. Nobody in the media has taken Mayor Mike Duggan to task more than Bankole Thompson. I've been his biggest critic in the mainstream white media. I've been his biggest critique. And I know he didn't like it, because sometimes he acts like a spoiled brat. I know he did not like it. Somebody got to hold him accountable. And I keep referencing what a white correspondent, a local network, a prominent white male correspondent told me in the parking lot of a radio station. He said this to me: Bankole, the gatekeepers have looked the other way. The media gatekeepers have looked the other way on Mayor Mike Duggan. And I said to him, Bankole Thompson wouldn't look the other way. So Mike Duggan did not. He wrote, let me be clear. He rode on the proverbial white horse on Woodward to City Hall to become the mayor of Detroit. Right? He did not get the scrutiny that Pastor Kenlak is getting. But with Pastor Kenlak, they want to crucify him. Crucify him, crucify him, crucify him. They're forcing the brother to take his own cross. But they never forced Mayor Mike Duggan to take his own cross. They never did. And everybody's seen it in this mayor's race. Everybody's seen it. The crucifixion in the media of Pastor Kenlak. Right? Let me qualify it. I make my living using words, right? I'm a wordsmith. The near, N-E-A-R, the near crucifixion of Pastor Kenlak in the media. And that's why I said, for the debate on Wednesday, October 15, Kenlak needs to come out and lay out the case, why he's the anti-establishment candidate. He needs to come out and talk about why he decided to take this journey to run to become the next mayor of Detroit. He needs to explain that. There are people that are waiting for him to make the case, to convince them. Because it's more than just saying, well, I'm running against Mary Sheffield. I mean, there are folk who may not like Mary Sheffield. There are folk who like Mary Sheffield, and they will support Mary Sheffield. She's been on council. She's been council president. You know, they talk about her family background of civil rights. There are folk who are going to support that. Right? Pastor Kenlak also has a different but similar background. You know, his mother was a sharecropper, born out of Dillon County, South Carolina, picking cotton, moved to Detroit during the Race Rebellion. South Carolina, the home of the Confederacy, right? Pastor Kenlak did not finish his theological education at the American Baptist Theological Seminary in Nashville, Tennessee, but that is the same seminary that Dr. Bernard Lafayette, my good friend and mentor, and the late Congressman John Lewis, civil rights hero and prophet, they were at the American Baptist Theological Seminary in Nashville. Pastor Kenlak went through the American Baptist Theological Seminary. So there are people who are waiting for Kenlak to explain himself, to let people know where he's coming from. You know, and when you watch the stories, when you watch the analysis, they make it look as if he just dropped out of the planet. And I said, how disrespectful. I said, this is what black people go through. This is what black men go through. This is what black women go through, right? We saw it with Kamala, right? Remember during the 2020 presidential race? Not 2024, 2020 presidential race. They were talking about the mayor of LA, Karen Bass. Now mayor of LA, she was a congresswoman back then. They were saying Karen Bass, Kamala Harris, and Susan Rice, 3 black women, were being considered for VP, right? What happened? The media started criticizing them. But when it came to Gretchen Whitmer, whose name was being mentioned, oh, she walk on water. Oh, Gretchen Whitmer walk on water. And they were upset because I went on CNN because I was among a group of folk, including Congressman Maxine Waters, who were pushing for Kamala, for a black woman to be on the ticket. Whoever it was going to be, we were pushing for a black woman to be on the ticket. And I wrote a column saying, I'll be damned that Biden goes with a white woman, because Gretchen Whitmer was the only VP candidate under consideration who met with Biden in Delaware. Kamala Harris did not even meet with Biden. None of the other contenders met with Biden face to face. Everybody had a phone called in. And I wrote a column, I remember, writing a column said, I'll be damned that Biden was making a fatal mistake. And I wrote a column on what happened. I was on CNN. John King asked me why I wrote that column. And I explained. And I was vehemently opposed to Whitmer being on the ticket. Oh, and they were mad. And I remember as soon as I got off CNN, I get a text from the producer for Flashpoint Channel 4. Asked me to come on to talk about the ticket. And of course, Devin Skillen was the moderator. And I said on the Flashpoint roundtable that Gretchen Whitmer cannot stand next to Karen Bass, Susan Rice, or Kamala Harris, that her qualifications are so thin. She's only been a governor for like 2 or 3 years, that her background is so thin, that her credentials is so thin, that she can nowhere be compared to a Karen Bass or Susan Rice or Kamala Harris. Oh, and the panel, they were not having it. How dare Bankole Thompson say that? So I'm using that as an example when I look at how accomplished Pastor Kenlak has been and what he has built in Triumph Church. And the media, there are folk in the media who try to delegitimize that. And there are folk who are feeding the media, made it look as if this brother dropped out of the planet, as if he just came from out of nowhere. You know how people try to, you see, that's part of what I call the racist caste system, the racial caste system. When your achievements are taken away from you, right? They want to take away what you've built. They lie about you. They try to define you. That's why I always insist that you have to define who you are. Don't let them define you. And don't let nobody who has not walked in your shoes try to tell you who you are. And I think I've been very clear about that. They know that. They know me. I don't take prisoners. So they stay out of my way. I don't take prisoners because I'll tell them right away in their face how I really feel. But I believe that you should not let anybody who has not walked in your shoes to define you. So the debate October 15th on Wednesday between Pastor Solomon Kinloch and Mary Sheffield, the mayoral debate at XXYZ Studios, Pastor Kenlak needs to define himself. He needs to tell Detroit who he is. He should not let them define who he is, because that's what they've been trying to do, to define you and delegitimize you and impugn your character and call your character into question. When Duggan was running for mayor in 2013, they did not define Duggan. They let Duggan define himself, and they ran with what Duggan defined himself as. They say he's he's such, they said Duggan is such a deal maker. He knows how to address issues. They projected Duggan as a big problem solver, DMC, the prosecutors. I mean, you name it. They never went after Duggan. And now they're going after Pastor Solomon Kinloch. So the debate on Wednesday between Pastor Kenlak and Mary Sheffield, Pastor Kenlak has an opportunity to set the record straight, the historical record straight once and for all, and talk about what he is going to do and define himself. Yes, debates sometimes do matter. I think debates have the propensity to move the needle. Debates have the propensity to move the needle. I think it can impact how people come out and support you. And I think one of the benefits of a general election is that it gives us two candidates. So you can size up Mary Sheffield and size up Pastor Kenlak. In the primary, you can't do that because you have so many candidates who are running, jockeying for position. You have them on a debate stage with 10, 11 candidates, somebody trying to give a cute zinger at the other, somebody trying to knock somebody down and say something cute or mean just to get attention. You have all of that, and it creates a lot of noise. But with a two-way race, like in a general election, you have two candidates. Kenlak has an opportunity here to say, well, I'm the guy, and this is what I can do. It's obvious that Mary Sheffield is the establishment candidate. I think everybody knows that Mike Duggan is the ultimate establishment, notwithstanding the fact that he's running as an independent. We'll get to that at some point down the line. But let's stay with the mayor's race. Let's stay with what let's skip the main thing. So this debate has an opportunity for Kenlak to allow people, his doubters and skeptics, to look at him differently, outside of the persistent attempt to define him by those who don't know him, but they're willing to do whatever it takes to throw dust into the eyes of the community. That's what happens to black folk. Believe me, it's called the racial caste system. It exists in the media. It exists in certain spaces of life. It's real. But one thing I always say, do not let them define you. Define who you are. Talk about the work that you have done. Take your credit. You built Triumph Church. Yes, take your credit. Talk about the 7 campuses. Talk about the lives that Triumph Church has saved. Talk about the work that you have done. That's why I always remind folk. When they come around trying to fool around me, I say, hold on. Let's get it straight now. Let's get it straight. You better recognize. You better know who you're talking to. And no foolishness here. And no foolishness here. You know, when I speak about the fact that the media has a propensity to be biased all the time, yes, because I'm an authority on the media. Yes, because I wrote a book on the media in 2006, 19 years ago. Where were you 19 years ago? Coming to my face talking a bunch of gobbledygook. Where were you 19 years ago when I wrote my first book on the media that was used at Eastern Michigan University for required reading? Where were you? So I set them straight right away. You got to be able to say what you've done and define your contributions. And I think a lot of people have not seen that with Kenlak, because Pastor Kenlak has been sometimes too humble about explaining what he has done. And his detractors seized upon that to try to define him and throw dust in the eyes of folk. But they never did that to Mike Duggan when he was running. They never did it to Mike Duggan, because Mike Duggan was what we call in English a sacred cow, untouchable. That's why he got pissed off that I subjected him to so much scrutiny. How dare I subject him to this level of scrutiny? How dare I criticize him when all the other white folk would not criticize him? The pens and the microphones disappeared as soon as he became, let me qualify it, the white pens and the white microphones disappeared as soon as he became mayor. So I'm a writer. I like to use I like to use imagery, right? In literature, right? The trees open their arms, right? Think about that. Mike Duggan was never scrutinized to the level that Kenlak is being scrutinized today. Never. He just walked on water. And if you notice the coverage on Mike Duggan running as an independent, they make it look like he's some sort of a prophet. Think about it. So the debate on Wednesday, Detroit mayoral debate on Wednesday, which is perhaps the only time that Kenlak and Sheffield will be on the same stage. Pastor Solomon Kinloch and Council President Mary Sheffield will be on the same stage. It's an opportunity for Pastor Kenlak to close the deal. It's an opportunity for him to close the deal. Because I don't believe that this mayor's race is over until it's over. There are people out there who still need to be convinced, who are still making up their mind. So I'd like to hear your reaction to the debate when we all watch it. Come back on this podcast and talk to us. Feel free to shoot me an email. I may actually be able to read some of your comments. My email is bankole@bankolethompson.com. Bankole@bankolethompson.com. If you pick a copy of the Detroit News or subscribe online, and you'll see at the end of my columns, my email is right there, bankole@bankolethompson.com. Shoot me an email. Give me your impression of the debate. I will read it on the podcast, and we'll have a dialogue on it. So for now, I'm going to urge you to do this. Please subscribe to this podcast. Please share this podcast with your coworkers. Please share this podcast with your friends, family members, and people that you're connected to. Because this level of analysis, this level of commentary, they don't want that. No. Yeah, they want you to listen to something else that speaks to the colonization of the mind. What we do here is decolonize the mind. Thank you so much. I'm Bankole Thompson. I'll see you another time for another edition of our podcast.